a man by the name of Theodor Herzl. Theodor Herzl was an Austro-Hungarian atheist, Jewish journalist, and political activist. He was a self-avowed secular who is considered the founder of modern Zionism. And he's the one that starts to propose or starts to cement and define this idea of a Jewish state, of a home for the Jewish people, especially in light of the rise of anti-Semitism in Europe and in the West. And we should, as Muslims, absolutely claim our history and say that while Jewish communities thrived not only in Palestine, by the way, there were Palestinian Jews, it's a historical fact, thrived not only in Palestine, but where would you find historic Jewish communities in the West that were able to survive the various political trends there, whereas you have historic Jewish communities in Yemen, in Morocco, in Iraq, and beyond that had their rights protected. Yes, infringements happened, but that's something that as Muslims we look to and we say, that's our history. We have a history. Europe has its crimes. And as Europe carries out its multiple pogroms and crimes against the Jewish people, likewise you have Theodor Herzl, who seeks to reformulate Judaism not as a religious covenant, but as a racialized identity. Hence, you can be secular, atheist, but still Jewish. It's a racialized identity. He seeks to formulate the idea, as the founders of Zionism formulate the idea, that the Jews are united by a racial identity, not by a religious covenant. That it's not by their abiding by the Torah, rather it is by lineage and political identity, and that is their distinctive trait, not their commitment to Judaism. What makes this so interesting is that the first people to rise up against such an idea were the rabbis of the time. Orthodox Jews, rabbis, found this to be a preposterous idea, that you formulate a Jewish identity that is racialized, separated from any type of religious commitment or covenant. And by the way, when I say it was expressive, Herzl said that he would be content with any political state where the Jews in the racialized sense could have self-determination. And so these ideas of a Zionist state were put forward. It could have been in Uganda, it could have been in Argentina, it could have been in Kenya, even Sinai, where they're trying to push us out to now. That was proposed as a location. And yes, of course, locations in the United States and other places were proposed as places where the Zionist project could take its hold. And amongst the places that were proposed were Palestine. Not because of a religious commitment, but because it would be politically convenient and ideal to tie the identity of the Jewish people to the historical place of Bani Israel and to form some sort of a link between a European ethno-state called Israel and Bani Israel that exists in the books. Somehow a racialized identity that privileges a people and allows them to expel the indigenous of that land and enjoy supremacy as Europe continues its crimes. And so Europe is not responsible for its reparations or for what it has done. You're not talking about the restoration of the rights of Jews in Germany. You're talking about the mass migration of Jews in the racialized sense to Palestine, and the expulsion of the people of that land in the name of safeguarding the Jews, which is an absolutely preposterous idea, and one that was rejected at the time and should be rejected by any moral voice, even till today. So he envisions this as a political and national entity rather than a religious one. It's actually, there's a saying that you don't believe in God, but you somehow believe that God promised you this land. And so it was common to find an atheist that still claimed the land on the basis of now a historical connection, a religious connection that God had supposedly forged between them. And they saw, the founders of the Zionist project, they saw religious voices as an obstacle, not as allies to the cause that they were putting forward. And so Palestine is chosen for political and colonial reasons, not for religious reasons. Most rabbis called it a rebellion against God. And you can read, subhanAllah, some of the works. Rabbi Shalom Bershnierson, who said, their plan to gather the Jewish people together with their own power will never be, and all their strength, their many strategies and efforts will not work or have any success against the will of God. Whoever twists the meaning of the Torah and finds proofs to Zionism from the Torah, and especially from the hidden Torah, is like the one who places an idol in the temple. May God in His great mercy remove this accursed doctrine from among the Jewish people and inspire their hearts to repent to Him in truth. Avraham Karelitz, a revered rabbi, wrote, the only actual difference between the formation of the Zionist state is that before this they were hoodlums without a military, and now the hoodlums have a military. Theodor Herzl himself, he wrote that we shall prevent any theocratic tendencies from coming to the fore on the part of our priesthood. We shall keep our priests within the confines of their temples. So what he envisioned of a state of Israel was supposed to be a secular one. The religious voices are rejecting it because you are rebelling against the decree of God, because the scripture explicitly states that you can't have a mass migration before the Messianic period. All of that is thrown out the window, and suddenly we have a situation where militant, secular atheists are joining with hands with European colonialists and slowly expelling the people from the lands of Al-Aqsa and from the lands of Palestine. By the way, David Ben-Gurion, who of course the airport is named after, the first prime minister of Israel, he himself used to take pride in being a pure secular. He was known to eat pork, to not abide by Yom Kippur, to never set foot in synagogues. His biographers would say he openly questioned the belief in God as a whole, somehow on the basis of religious supremacy. These are the people that are brought from Europe, and Muslims and Christians and indigenous people are expelled from their lands. And so how do we look at this from the European colonial power and what happened here? And I don't want to get too far into detail because we'll extend it into the last lecture. Herzl recognizes that Zionism cannot succeed without the support of what he calls a great power. And so he basically says that you have to pitch Zionism to a great power that can get behind it, so that it can form part of a defensive wall for Europe and Asia, an outpost of civilization against barbarism, against the barbarity of the Arab and Muslim world. So specifically, he's proposing, let's traffic in the way that the European colonialists are framing the Muslim world as barbarians and as wicked and evil people, and pitch this to the European colonialists to take the project of Zionism on and say that this will form as an imperialist base for you in the Muslim world. And it starts to sound very familiar. At the start of World War I, the Zionists attempted to persuade the British government of the benefits of sponsoring the Jewish colony in Palestine, a Zionist state in Palestine. And so who do they lobby first? The Rothschild family. And so through lobbying efforts, so familiar, subhanAllah, through lobbying efforts, they're able to get the Rothschild family to buy into the establishment of the state in historic Palestine. And hence you have the 1917 Balfour Declaration. 1919, in the US, there was a commission that was formed to explore the possibility of Zionism, or what it was looking at in terms of the establishment of a state in historic Palestine. And the King Crane Commission wrote that the initial claim often submitted by Zionist representatives that they have a right to Palestine based on occupation of 2,000 years ago can barely be seriously considered. And so you would have to considerably modify or reduce your version of the Zionist program in order to put forth the idea that Palestine is the location of this Jewish national home. And they proposed that it could be a Jewish national home, but not a Jewish state. And so the initial ideas were the emphasis of Jewish immigration to a protected Jewish national home in Palestine that then becomes a Jewish supremacist state named Israel imposed on the people of Palestine. And this is how you start to see the formulation of the supremacy of Zionism coming forth. Britain and France supporting Zionism to advance their own imperial interests, and Britain helping Zionist militias to actively clear out the area and to make room for further European adventure in this part of the world. SubhanAllah, one of the great thinkers of our time at Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, Malcolm X rahimahullah ta'ala, visits Gaza in 1964. And he wrote an essay that you can look up called Zionist Logic. And he views Zionism for what it is at the time. And he says the number one weapon of 20th century imperialism is Zionist dollarism. And one of the main bases for this weapon is Zionist Israel. The ever-scheming European imperialists wisely placed Israel where she could geographically divide the Arab world, infiltrate, and sow the seed of dissension among African leaders, and also divide the Africans against the Asians. Zionist Israel's occupation of Arab Palestine has forced the Arab world to waste billions of precious dollars on armaments, making it impossible for these newly independent Arab nations to concentrate on strengthening the economies of their people and elevating their living standards. And the continued low standard of living in the Arab world has been skillfully used by Zionist propagandists to make it appear to the Africans that the Arab leaders are not intellectually or technically qualified to lift the living standard of their people, thus indirectly inducing Africans to turn away from the Arabs and towards the Israelis for teachers and technical assistance. In other words, they cripple the bird's wing and then condemn it for not flying as fast as they. And he says that to American blacks and Muslims, that both suffer due to Zionist colonialism and American dollarism, and that fighting these two evils would serve both purposes. And so as you see the Polish terrorist, whose fake name is Benjamin Netanyahu, a Polish terrorist standing next to a morally bankrupt realtor, talking about the removal of a people and the purchase of a land and the expulsion, because this would open up doors. Know that this is recycled rhetoric, and it is exactly what Malcolm calls imperialism and dollarism meeting together. A marriage of evils, where the people are looked at as less than and removed from their historic places. And Malcolm, subhanAllah, saw that the placement of Palestine between the Arab world and Africa made it specifically a strategic place for imperialists, to have an imperial outpost in this part of the world, to serve its colonial interests. And the word transfer was used in Zionist literature of the non-Jewish population, which means ethnic cleansing is at the heart of Zionism, and there was never any such thing as Zionism without ethnic cleansing. So if anyone tries to redeem a strain of Zionism and tell you that it's not inherently ethno-supremacist, show me one Zionist leader or pioneer that didn't advocate for the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people. It doesn't exist. Every strain of it required the removal of the people for the placement of another people, which is illegal by any moral standard. To end here, when does Zionism turn religious? So it's only after 1967 that Zionism starts to take on a more religious framework. That religious language starts to find itself within Zionism, and that you start to find more biblical references being used. And this, of course, allows for religious extremists, Jewish religious extremists, right? Functioning within their version of Zionism, to find a marriage partner in Christian religious Zionists in the United States, both of whom want to forge a messianic era, but for different purposes, right? Religious Christian, I can't make this up. I was once on a panel with a rabbi and a pastor, and the pastor was an evangelical, and he was talking about, we see the development of Israel as the heart of Christianity and what we do. And the rabbi said, and I'm not making this up, he said, yeah, so you could kill us. It's a marriage of convenience that throws every moral standard out of the window and allows for the continued expulsion of a people. And it was again in the 1960s that religion starts to become infused more into the Zionist project. And Zionism, which was a secular atheistic movement, becomes more religious in its outpost, and that's where you start to see now these crazy right-wingers that are forcing themselves through the barricades of Masjid al-Aqsa and putting forth this idea of the reconstruction of the third temple as the heart of their mission. And this is where we are today. Conspiracies, efforts, impacts. I've been asked in the last year about the red heifer conspiracy. The idea of a red cow sounds silly, but these extremists actually believe that al-baqara al-hamra, that a red heifer has to be born in order for there to be a ceremonial cleansing that would allow for the reconstruction of the third temple. And guess what they've been doing? Just like they genetically modified the illegal state of Israel, they're trying to genetically modify a red cow. Where from? Texas. And so there is an institute in Texas where you've had 5 red heifers that were sent to Israel 2023, right? Because they're trying to breed the perfect red cow. These crazy religious zealots are trying to breed the perfect red cow, which would supposedly open the doors for the next temple. On top of that, obviously, you have the idea of the Greater Israel Project, where Zionism is inherently expansionist. And it shows that it's not just about Palestine, it's also about Syria and Jordan and Lebanon and Iraq and Egypt and beyond. And it will not stop because it's an expansionist ideology that doesn't know when to stop itself. And now you can hear these extremists openly talking about the expanse of these borders. And that has always been the case in everything that has taken place. And so now you have this idea of the third temple and the establishment of the third temple where Masjid al-Aqsa is.